Hello, 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 New Haven, and welcome back to Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. Arts Respond is a collaboration with the Arts Council of Greater New Haven, where I am the editor of the arts paper. We took a couple weeks to, I don't know, life was lifing, right? As it is for so many of us, especially right now in the world we live in. But I am thrilled to be back with Reverend Odell Montgomery Cooper and Dr. Jonathan Berryman, and we are talking about Interruptions, which turns 5 years old this year. I'm like, maybe, I don't think denial is the right word about that, but I feel like I don't know what's going on with time, because I remember our very first interview. And so I would love to just kick right off with asking you, Reverend Odell Montgomery Cooper, to talk a little bit about, for listeners who maybe are not familiar with Interruptions, a little bit about what the project is, and then we'll talk about how it's evolved, because it has grown. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that it has really grown into a movement.
It has. It has. Thank you. Interruptions started 9 years ago, really, when my son was murdered by mistaken identity, and me not understanding, me disrespecting mental health. And from that, I suffered a brain aneurysm. And on my journey towards healing and trying to re-engage my life back into the community, I ran into my dear friend Jonathan, and I'll let him tell that part of the story. And he encouraged me to tell my story as a play. And I didn't know how to, but he said, you know, people. And it became a play. And it's supposed to be a stage play at Bergamo's, but the stage disappeared due to pandemic. And we had to shift. That's when you came on board. It now became a virtual play. And you kept asking me, how are you doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't even know what it meant, let alone how to perform this. And Jonathan, Dr. Berryman again, said, you got too many stories that you told us that we couldn't capture in 90 minutes for the play. You need to write a book. And wrote the book. And then he said to me, how are you going to teach this? And I'm like, I don't know. So did a workbook. And from that, it has grown and grown into gained the attention, the attraction of Clifford Beers here in New Haven, that funded us to be able to offer our signature program is called the Let's Talk training program, which is a peer-to-peer emotional wellness program. And we began offering that to the Greater New Haven faith-based community. But because now congregations are streaming, we now have a virtual audience. So now it has become a national movement. And what Interruptions is that we are redefining how communities talk about trauma and how to recover from it.
And I do, before I bring in Dr. Jonathan Berryman, who wears many hats, among them musician, choral conductor, educator, a Renaissance man, is that fair? Right?
Sure.
But I do want to talk about something you said, which was that you said you disregarded mental health. And I want to talk a little bit, because I think this is pertinent to the interview, about the fact that it's not just an individual thing, though. We have systems, right, that are telling us that mental health is like, you can address it, or you can deal with mental health issues or grief issues on a finite timeline, but there really is not the structural framework in place, especially in communities that have been historically oppressed, and also under-resourced, and I think it's fair to say are being very much oppressed today under the current administration, to talk about both mental health and trauma-informed healing. And so I'm wondering just a little bit if you can talk about how this is also a systems issue that you were taking on.
I didn't know it was a systems issue. In my culture, we don't talk about trauma. We're not taught trauma as a language. We're not taught the behaviors, especially being in the faith community. We're taught to pray it away, have faith. If it's happening to you, it's God's will. Pray more. Our ancestors survived without therapy and counseling, so can you. wearing the mask of a strong Black woman or a woman and a man who don't cry. Those are what I was struggling with. And I pushed back because none of those languages or behaviors were helping me to heal. It was hindering my healing. And when I began to question, and where did I learn this from? How did I inherit it? I realized that a lot of it came from our ancestors who were enslaved and were taught to deal with it and to hold on to it and to trust God. And this has been a journey of understanding my faith, my culture, and mental health, and stories that have shaped who I am, and addressing them and dismantling those stories so that I can heal and be better. And that's what Dr. Berryman has encouraged me to share.
And I want to talk about those first iterations of the project, just so folks understand how it has grown. So I know that the two of you were speaking at a fundraiser, right? It was a political fundraiser. And like you struck up a conversation, as people so often do when they're in those physical spaces together. Tell me how we go from there to a stage production, which then becomes a video production, because you were making the pandemic pivot, right? Which all of us had to do. We had to learn these new technologies with COVID, to a book and a course that is now taking over, to like, you were in the Vatican, were you not, Reverend Cooper?
Yes, I
Yeah, that's a
was.
big deal. That's a
That
big
is a
deal.
big
Like
deal.
you
I
and the
was
Pope, right?
not quite the Pope. No, I was invited by a biblical scholars to go to Rome to have a discussion with their international team on trauma. And they flew me out to the Vatican they flew me out to Rome for a week, and I spoke. They was just coming still in the pandemic, so we had a lot of restrictions of where we can go, and we ended up having space at the Vatican Library in the courtyard where we can all gather together. And I had a conversation with the international scholars about my story, about trauma in America, and realizing that trauma and faith is not an American story. It is not a Black story. It is a life story. And people, the church, life, walks of life, everyone is experiencing trauma. So that was an awesome experience.
Dr. Berryman, I want to bring your voice into this. Talk about those first conversations. And did you have any sense that this was going to evolve into a movement?
No. But I didn't need to have a sense, right? I knew it was something, but did I know it was going to become where it is 5 years later? No. Or where it's going to be 20 years from now? I had no idea. So Odell and I Dr. Cooper and I have known each other since the Clinton administration. We met at Barrack AME Zion Church back in 1995. So we have known each other now for 30 years. So at that political fundraiser, Reverend Cooper said she was reinventing herself. I knew she had had an aneurysm, but I had not seen her since her recovery. So when she said that, it something in my spirit clicked. And before we left, I had to circle back to her and ask her what she meant by that. Right? It was the first time I had heard that term, and something in the spirit kept prompting me to say, no, dig deeper in this. When she told me what was happening, I said, and I thought about Johannes Brahms and how in dealing with the death of his mother, he wrote the Brahms Requiem, which is one of the most performed choral works around the world. In dealing with the grief of his mother passing, he created something that hundreds of years later is still resonating with people. And I also think about Mahalia Jackson in the March on Washington. King was rattling on, and she told him, "Tell him about the dream." And that's why the world knows the "I Have a Dream" speech, because there was Mahalia Jackson, the musician in the background, that said, "Preacher, pivot." So I like to see myself I think I was the voice that just allowed that pivot. And
Yes.
I'm glad that I was there to do that. And I am reminded today, or I just sat down and thought about it, Interruptions is a COVID baby. You asked where the time went. Well, there were a lot of children born in COVID, and we knew they were born, and now when we're meeting them, oh, you have a voice, a personality, you're walking and grabbing stuff. Some of these things we really haven't met since they were born, right? Because we weren't allowed to visit people. We weren't allowed to make those journeys. And now we're seeing these people who were born in 2020. In our minds, they're still babies, but no, they're on their feet, they're walking, they're thinking, and they have opinions. And I think Interruptions is at that point now that we saw where it was. It's we wanted to present it to the world in a stage play way, and it ended up being a virtual production, and now the whole world has gone virtual. So if they wanted to see it, they really could see it all over the world again.
And a podcast.
Yes. And we did podcasts. Jonathan said, you got to keep this going. He was always, but it was never about me. As I reflected back, Jonathan, you were never telling me to do this. You were telling me to tell my story to help others. It was always about helping others. It was about the community. I was just a vehicle that was delivering the message because it happened to me. So therefore, I told my personal story. But it was always about helping our community.
And I will say there's both a national and international component to this, but there's also a hyper-local component. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that, because it is not just both of your voices, but many New Haven voices that have shaped this framework. And then also I know that you have collaborated with groups like CTVIP, which is, if folks don't know them, they do wonderful work. It stands for Connecticut Violence Intervention Project, and they're here.
Yes.
And you held a salon. I don't know if that's the right word, around trauma-informed healing. And I will say, while I'm very struck by the truth that trauma is a universal phenomenon, I will say the trauma of gun violence, which many, many people in New Haven and in the US are dealing with, in some ways is a very uniquely American phenomenon, or I should say epidemic.
It is, but what we've done with Interruptions, it's not just gun violence. When we started trying to figure out a name for this movement, Jonathan said, it will come. And then as I was talking to students, I was teaching a class at Bridgeport University, and I wanted to teach the adults how to deal with, it wasn't grief. Trauma wasn't in my language or vocabulary to understand it. And it was interruptions, how to deal with any type of life interruptions that causes you to pause and take a deep breath, and you have to reinvent yourself. So on this journey of telling this story, we've gone from, yes, it's mine of gun violence, but others, it has been child molestation, divorce, marriage, the pandemic, a new job. I remember Jonathan saying, I've never had a day off in my life. I taught my entire career. So now the pandemic gave him a day off and gave him a chance to breathe. Interruptions. The whole world went virtual. Churches, congregations had to start streaming. People stopped coming. The whole world changed. So how do you adjust and deal with that? So when we teach these classes, everybody chimes in on their interruptions. And they'll see it's been astounding to hear the stories that aren't just impacted by gun violence, but the secrets we've been asked to keep because of our gender, our culture, our profession. That's been weighing on us and affecting our employment, our spirituality, our marriages, relationships, and employment. And it's been given voice, as Jonathan said, people need to hear your story. It is giving voice to the community to talk about trauma and then find a path towards healing.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if both of you can talk a little bit more about the framework, because I think it's a very interesting sort of meeting space that doesn't exist in a lot of the world of faith. In this case, a lot of Christian faith leaders, or primarily Christian faith leaders, but faith, public health, mental health, coming together to talk about trauma, which is this like complex constellation of issues that is never singular, right? So I'm wondering if you can talk about building that framework and then continuing to reimagine it, because this is something that I feel like has evolved over and over again, and the performing arts within that.
Jonathan, I go to you.
So Babs asked a question the other day about the screenplay itself, the play, what our intentions are with it. And it really wasn't until she asked that question that I'd given any recent thought to it. But the original idea was that the play itself would be reproducible in any number of communities. All right, and I think that is an aspect that we really have not pushed for, but it's something that is worth exploring. All right, I would be curious to see how Chicago would put the play on. Right, so we have the play, the play itself. There's the book, now 2 books. There are the discussion cards that are now available. So there are a whole host of opportunities for people to engage in this material. And I think at this point, at 5 years old, it is a question, really, the podcast, it really is the question about what are the next steps in making all of these things available to communities so they really can have robust conversations about how trauma has impacted them. And certainly I can speak to it from the faith perspective, where yes, we are taught to pray. Yes, we are taught to have faith in God. But there isn't a whole lot of conversation around really being expressive about what's happening with you. Right. Yes. So it is the living in isolation. It is the holding stuff in, the not knowing how to really release it that is causing frustration, physical ailments, and separation in communities.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, part of this is, have you felt on this journey, and Reverend Cooper on the longer Interruptions journey, right? Thinking of this as a journey that is almost a decade long and not half a decade long. Have you also felt that sometimes people are discouraged from speaking about the fact that they're grappling with their faith, that they're battling with their faith? Because I know that sometimes people are told, this is all part of the plan and God's in control, so don't question it. And I think that when a massive traumatic event happens in your life, especially the loss of a child, I know that I would say, like, I'm very religious or spiritual or whatever it is, I'm Jewish, that would really test my faith.
And it has tested people's faith, but it's opened them up to examine their faith. No one has been discouraged about talking about it. They're welcoming. They're like, this has never happened. We've never had a safe space to talk about and they don't call it mental health, our behaviors, our pain, without being judged. That's why Interruptions is being received so well, because it's giving people a safe space to talk and to share. And they have not realized that the body keeps the score, epigenetics, that trauma is hereditary. And what happened to us, we may suppress it, but it shows up in our bodies, our behaviors, and our language. And when we give them the tools and the language to talk about it, it is amazing the release that people have been giving us. And our training is an 8-week session. We do it for 90 minutes virtual and in person at Community Baptist Church. We don't have anything more than 25 people in a group. We enjoy the small breakout sessions. And when I tell you, Lucy, when the people come back, they're willing now to tell their doctors the truth versus saying, I'm blessed and highly favored. I'm doing okay. They now say, I don't sleep at night. They're now saying, I didn't deal with the loss of a loved one. I didn't cry. Believe this or not, I didn't cry for my daughter who passed away years ago. And when they get to this program, they open up and they share. Not being able to mourn because grieving is considered weakness. Okay, get over it. You know, you're the matriarch, the patriarch of the family. You got to wear the mask, and that mask has been hindering us. And when Dr. Berryman says the second book is coming out, it's about the people. We've trained over 14 congregations, plus their virtual audience. That's what has turned us into a national phenomenon. And they're coming in, and we trained over 250 people. And from 80% of those population have said they are now on a path towards healing, telling their doctors the truth, open about seeking professional help, and either wearing the sleep mask, taking the medication that they need because they realize how they've been feeling is not good and they want to feel better.
Yeah, so that leads me into my next question, which is talking about also like your hopes and dreams for this program or for this movement, now and going forward. And we'll talk about the celebration of 5 years as well. But for this going forward, this is so much of your life now.
This is my life. Yes.
This is your life.
Jonathan, I go to you first on that one because I always take your lead.
Well, I want to reiterate, the Interruptions is not just for old people, right? So in one of the hats I wear as assistant principal at Hill House High School, I want to make it very clear that we have people who have not reached 18 years old yet who also have experienced significant trauma. And we see it in their behaviors. We see it in their grades. We see it in their absenteeism. That it is not so. So this whole concept is not just for baby boomers and Generation X, but there are some Gen Z people. There are some millennials. There are some Alpha generation people who also need space to talk about how their lives have been interrupted. And one of the things that I appreciate about the discussion cards, and one of the places that this might actually be marketable, is in our school systems. Because what we're seeing is, so Hill House has 6 generations within that building. We have people who were born during the silent generation, early baby boomers, late baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Gen Z, the Alpha generation, and Alpha generation. We have 6 generations of people operating from different frameworks of what they've been taught. And as Odell has already said, part of our job in dealing with trauma is to unpack the non-productive behaviors that we've learned to mask it.
Yes, it's generational trauma. And if we had to put an umbrella on it, that's what it is. We are breaking generational trauma, language, behavior, and majority of it is we're looking at through the lens of our faith. So it doesn't matter if you're a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, we all have trauma and we all have traditions. And as Dr. Berryman's been talking about the discussion cards that we've created, because every generation learns differently. And this newer generation, they're used to technology and quickness, conversations. So we created discussion cards. And it's called Passed Down, Stories That Shaped Us. And it's 2 categories, grown folks discussion and grown enough to know. And because of technology, the grown enough to know is 16 and up. Because of the internet and all this, they know more than we knew at 16. So we have discussions and conversations of stories that were passed down that shaped us, and we pass them down to the next generation. Doesn't mean those stories were helpful. So telling a man, you're a man, stop crying, is not helpful. That is generational trauma. I was told, if my, and this was people who didn't know, but came from their heart. If it happened to me, it was God's will. So I was to accept it. And what God knew, this was going to happen to me when I was in my mother's womb. So this is God's plan. And that did not help me to love my God, to want to be in relationship with my God. But what it did, it helped me to re-examine what I was, stories that were passed down to me that shaped me, for me to say, God had a plan for me, but when evil crept in and took the life of my son, God created another path for me. And my obedience, and Dr. Berryman has been on that path, has been that voice to say, do this, do that. And it's never been about me. It's about the message, the community of how we give back. And that is the work that we do.
I also appreciate that you are shifting narratives also in how you have these discussions. So one of the best things that I've heard from you is when people ask how you're doing, and you even have a shirt, I think, that says ask me another question. And it's, I find, especially in this moment that we are living in, but just generally speaking, I have experienced grief. I think grief is unfortunately like a pretty universal experience. And even like, I find how's your heart a better question, or what do you need in this moment? But it's like, hey, you lost this person who was very, very dear to you. And sometimes and I think that we've been socialized to say it too. And I will be the first to say I'm guilty of this. I've said to people, this morning in a press conference, I said to someone who is in the middle of a very difficult immigrations case, I said, how are you doing? And immediately I thought, oh, that was the incorrect question, because she's not doing good. And I knew she wasn't doing good going into it. And so I'm also wondering, when you are having these conversations with people, you're talking about shifting language, which I think is a really important part of this discussion. So talk me through that as well.
We're taught in the faith, wherever your faith is, you're taught to have certain language and responses. Like when Dr. Berryman said, what's been going on with you? And I said, I'm reinventing myself. My doctor gave me that word because I wanted to say something other than my son was murdered, I had a brain aneurysm. That's a Debbie Downer. I didn't want to keep wearing that pain. So I said, I'm reinventing myself. Everyone else said, oh, that's nice. Didn't go deeper with me. Jonathan was the only one that said, come back, tell me more. And I said, do you really want to know the truth, or you just, what, before I unpack my heart? And what I've learned, Lucy, was I had to stop responding to people to make them feel better. I responded in my truth. And then my truth was, I'm in pain. I hurt. I can't sleep. I had a brain aneurysm. Doctor said, stop praying for her. She's not going to make it. And the grace of God, I'm here. And if she does live, she's going to be a paralytic because the left side of my body started to shut down. So it's language. So when I share my story of what I went through, people go, oh my God, that's it. And so I stopped responding to make somebody else feel good. So if you ask me, this is how I feel. No, I don't feel well. And I knew that people didn't know how to talk to me. So my response was, ask me another question. And they would look at me like, I don't know what that means. I said, well, until you find it, see you later. And I would hang up on people because I did a hung up because I didn't want to just say, blessed and highly favored, I'm okay. And people were annoyed with me because I was saying I'm in pain. But what we don't teach in our culture is PTSD, We don't teach that these events that go on in our life, trauma has a reaction, a detonation, and it impacts our bodies in ways that we've never been able to explain it and never been able to talk about it. And that's why I say we are now, Interruptions has found its niche. We are helping people redefine how they talk about trauma and recover from it.
And Dr. Berryman, I'm wondering, for you, have you also noticed that through working on this project in its many different forms and iterations, you have been able to shift language in your own, I mean, you wear many hats, right? You're not just an educator, you are not just working on this, you also are just like a highly social being and work with a lot of people, including in your musical capacity as well. Do you find that it has shifted how you're thinking about language, both when people ask you how you're doing and when you're talking to people about how they're doing?
I actually have found it has made me a much more compassionate person. Where I don't well how are you doing might not even be a question I ask of people who I know who are experiencing trauma. Right? That, like I said, in working with young people, it might not even be how you do it. It might be, it is just good to see you, and I'm glad you're here. Right? So switching to language that just affirms their humanity when I see them. Because when you know people have stressful situations, they don't necessarily want to share all that, right? But they do want to feel seen. So as someone who works with a lot of people, that asks me another question. I think will just needs to be trademarked. It is certainly appropriate, right? And even to the point where I had to really think about my approach. Yes, we always want to say it is well with my soul. If God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it. There are a lot of platitudes that church folk will throw around. And it is not that they are necessarily wrong, but it is more so the case their timing might be. And
Yes.
and there needs to be more to it than just that. There has to be, if God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it. But in the meantime, I'm here with you. Let's talk about, what do you need? Right? So we always need those in the meantime conversations. And I don't think that everybody gets the chance to have those. So Interruptions is offering that space where people can have those in the meantime while I'm still hurting conversations. It might get better, but it's not there today.
And I also want to say, I wanted to ask about getting this into the school. I mean, that is something that I thought about from the very first discussion we had about this 5 years ago this month. Getting it into the schools, because I think, Dr. Berryman, you're very right. I am not in the schools every day, so my experience is not the same, but I'm often in the classroom. And I would say, many of the kids are not all right right now. And I understand why, because look at the world that they are inheriting, right?
Many of the adults are not all right.
That's right. That's right.
When a child can be picked up from school without a parent knowing about it, not knowing where they are, shipped off to another state.
That's right.
Not being able to access them, find them, and then find out that they're in another place. They're not in Louisiana now, they're in Massachusetts. What does this do to this 16-year-old? And what does it do to their parents? So that's why we're generational trauma, because it impacts the teachers, everybody, every level, every human being who cares, has compassion. This is impacting them. I didn't know that young man, but I pray every morning for him and his family, because that is horrible for anyone to have to go through. So we've been having, not to put anybody on blast here, but Dr. Berryman has encouraged me to reach out to the school systems. We've actually had conversations where this has been taught to people from Southern. We've had college students come through this program, police officers, retired firefighters, and they're coming in. And one of the great thing I like is this program, our Let's Talk program, is certified to give 16 CEU credits to social workers. So they're coming through, and they're like, oh my God, I wish I had learned this in school. So we're having conversations with Dr. Liz Keenan, I'll throw her name out there, at Southern. And yesterday I spoke to Keisha Hyman and Keisha Red Hamas, and spoke to her about how do we partner together. Clinicians have asked me to come speak to their mental health clinician staff, because they're trying to find the language and the words to talk to people who have a faith. And they're saying, we don't know everybody's faith. I'm like, you don't have to know our faith, but if we sit in front of you and say, I'm blessed and highly favored, or it's God's will, then ask me, why do I believe it? Who told me that? And show me that in the scripture. And they're like, we can do that? I'm like, yeah, you can do that. Because when we come to find out, it's not scripture based. It's from a story that came from our ancestors. And believe it or not, who were enslaved. And their slave master said, you're enslaved because it's God's will, therefore don't question it. Accept it. And those were passed down to us from generation. And Lucy, you're not a Christian, but there are stories that were passed down to you of what it is that you need to do. And you've passed them down. And that's what we're trying to get people to look at and to break those languages and behaviors.
I want to shift just a little bit. I do want to save some time to talk about, the big systems changes that both this program is initiating and you're hoping to see. But I'm going to save that just for a minute. And I do want to shift to something celebratory and talk about the fact that there is a 5-year celebration coming up on September 17th. It's at 6, if I'm correct, or 6:30, sorry. Doors open
at 6.
So get there at 6. And it's at City Seat, which has a beautiful new building at 162 James Street. They just pretty recently, about a year ago, moved into that building and are making it their own home. And I want to talk about the fact that this is a big deal and it's a fundraiser. And so how are you also taking time to, it sounds maybe strange, or maybe it doesn't sound strange to say we're celebrating all the work we've done around trauma-informed healing. But I think that should be celebrated, especially in the world we're living in, right?
Yes. We're celebrating what we could not celebrate before. The play, the book, the audio book, the workshops. And we are celebrating not just me and my journey, my obedience to God, and the blessings. For someone that was told that I wasn't going to live, I've earned my PhD, and I've studied in Rome for 2 years. That's unheard of. So we're celebrating. I never had a chance to celebrate. So we're celebrating all of the successes that I've had along the way, but we are celebrating the people, the 250 plus people who have gone through this program and have found a path towards healing and are in a better place today because of the Let's Talk training program, and social workers who know how to address their clients, teachers, firefighters, police officers, any human being that has ever had to understand pain through the lens of their faith and try to understand, how do I heal from this? We're celebrating. So we've started a nonprofit, and the New Haven community has said yes to me. So the nonprofit is called the Interruption Project, and we have a board in place. And Yale Law Clinic, I thank Anika. She filed my paperwork for me, and we are an official nonprofit. And the key thing for us is to provide tools and resources to congregations communities of faith, to help them to adopt trauma-informed training, tools, and resources to educate their people. Because no matter what happens, the church, the faith community is the first place that people go and say help. And they can't do it by themselves. So we want to help partner with them, partner with the schools, communities, people, to be able to help them with the language and the resources they need, because this is a heavy task and they can't do it by themselves.
That's right. I want to remind folks really quickly that you're listening to Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. My guests today are Reverend Odell Montgomery Cooper and Dr. Jonathan Berryman, and we are talking about Interruptions, which is a whole movement. It is a play, a podcast, a book, a peer-to-peer framework around trauma-informed healing and being able to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, and grief, and an upcoming fundraiser on September 17th. I want to bring another Jonathan into the conversation, Reverend Cooper, which is your son. And I want to talk about the ways that he's with you and the ways that you carry him with you in this work.
It's difficult. It's heavy. And I've only been able to do it through prayer and grace, because carrying him on this journey is too heavy for me. I can't do it. So it's not about him, because it's about him that I'm crippled. So it is about the people, healing the people. He's the catalyst. This Jonathan is the other catalyst. And I tell my daughter, it's no longer about my son, Jonathan. It is about the people. And writing the second book was hard, because it's called Letters to My Son. And each chapter is me telling him how we're doing since his transition. And that was the hardest book to write, because I'm talking to him directly. And the weight of the trauma and the pain came back. And I had to step away and remember everything my therapist taught me, everything I learned with my faith in God, and said, take this, I can't carry it, it's too heavy for you. And the message was to stop trying to do a letter every day. So I had to take a step back and had to get help. That's why it took me over a year. I didn't want to do this book, but Reverend Street said I had to. He said, you took money from your incidents happened in New Haven. You took grant funding from funders in New Haven, and you poured back into the New Haven community. You have to tell their stories of how they interacted with your program and how they healed from it. He said you owe it to the community. And I didn't want to, but it was a spiritually confirmed message, and I bucked it, and the second book is actually finished, Letters to My Son. And we're working on getting that published this year. It's about funding, and that's why we're doing the fundraiser for programs for the nonprofit and other projects that we want to be able to launch that aren't just structured teaching based, but trainers. How do we train the teachers? How do we train them to deal with it and to take care of themselves before you can take care of somebody else?
And I just want to pause this conversation and say, I hope that you recognize, I really believe that there have been a lot of lives, multiple lives saved through this program. So I just want to acknowledge that. I hope that, I find that sometimes people who are in this work, whether they are political activists or organizers, whether they are doing faith-based work, often don't take a step back to recognize that and to look at the impact of their work. I've talked actually to faith leaders among whom burnout is extremely high, especially right now. And so I just want to acknowledge that as part of this conversation.
As you know, what we did. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I want to talk about that this is a New Haven celebration, right? Yes, it's about interruptions is celebrating its 5th anniversary, but sometimes we are so busy doing what we do in New Haven that we don't always recognize what New Haven gives birth to.
That's right.
All right, so I want to shout out Interruptions as being a something that is coming out of New Haven, Connecticut. Right, so we don't oftentimes get a chance to do that level of celebration. And as I think about Interruptions, I think about Dr. James Comer and his model of how to really shift education. Right, New Haven has given birth to some phenomenal programs that really help our institutions move forward. I mentioned James Comer because he's internationally known. He's over 90 years old, and his work was pivotal in helping schools how to do better by their communities. Here we are in 2025 looking at Interruptions, whose work now is pivotal in helping faith communities look at how we address how we disrupt the silence of trauma. So for those who don't know Interruptions or the work, come out and celebrate what New Haven is doing early on, because it's still a 5-year-old, right? Many of us were identified as already being gifted and talented when we were 5. Somebody already knew that child right there. And I think many of us are pointing at Interruptions at 5 years old to say that child right there is going to have phenomenal impact as it ages. So I'm encouraging everybody to come out now, celebrate this 5-year-old, and be a part of its trajectory of growth. Yes, with the $75 tickets, and then also with your tax-exempt contributions going forward.
That was the best fundraising pitch I've ever heard also. But it is true. I think New Haven does have this history of innovation that is very exciting, especially around education. And when I say education, I don't just mean K through 12 education. I mean education is a lifelong process and how we learn. So I'm really glad that you brought that into the discussion. And sometimes when I'm in the schools, this is a whole other radio episode, I'm like, what? Can we go back to that moment? And some teachers are in their classroom. I want to recognize that there are some extraordinary educators in the New Haven public schools, and I'm very, very proud of this district. And you are one of them, Dr. Berryman.
Thank you.
But sometimes I want to say to folks like, y'all, we have this beautiful history of innovation. If you think about places like ECA, which was founded as the dream of some artists who were like, hey, maybe we should do this for the next generation. When you think about high school in the community, there's so many examples. So I also want to ask you, as we wind down our time together, both of you are holding so much for the community and I mean the local New Haven community, but I also mean all of the communities that your work touches, right? How are you caring for yourselves in this moment?
Jonathan?
Well, this was probably the most restful summer I've had in a number of years. So I took time to respect the fact that I am on vacation. So that really meant allowing myself time to roll over and go back to sleep. Time to let my mind wander, time to sit and stare aimlessly without having to do something. And it has also fostered time for innovation, to talk about the what ifs, to really look at the big picture, and as I say, to allow God's voice to overshadow my own. Because as a person of faith, I truly do believe that God orders my steps, and I'm grateful about it. But I have to listen to what God is saying. God spoke to me and said, go back to Odell and ask her what she means about reinventing herself. I know that was the voice of God. There's no question in my mind. There was no question then, and there's no question now. So having time to really take time to meditate and to reflect on what to do now, where God is leading me now, and where I no longer have to go, right? What doors are opening, what doors are closing, has been an important part of this summer journey, and I'm glad about it.
For me, it's been finish the second book, get the discussion cards out. But on this journey, I've learned to re-engage with my community and vacation. I mean, I graduated my PhD last summer, so I need to rest. I need to sleep because that was a lot of work. But I've been in Rome twice, so it's like, so how do I detox from that? And I now have international relationships and communities. So what I'm doing for myself is once September happens, there's a board that is on this journey with me. It's no longer a one woman healing mission. It is now a national phenomenon, and I have a wonderful team that is going to help me to execute, make relationships, open doors, do this training. And I have a wonderful team of facilitators from all the congregations here in Greater New Haven area who are interested in this work here virtually as well. And I am learning now to breathe. I need the sun. And I'm opening myself back up again to personal relationships of love and romance. How about that?
We all need romance. I'm also a big believer that if people want to be single and do their thing, that's important too. But
so I'm open up to being transparent with who I am, accepting who I am, not hiding my, instead of grieving my healthy self and saying I can't. I've learned to function with my disabilities and challenges and still enjoy life. And that's been my joy.
That's beautiful. I feel like I want to have both of you back on just to have an episode about systems changes and how we can affect change on both the municipal and state and federal level, even in the landscape in which we are living. But I want to just remind listeners as we're winding down that there is a fundraiser coming up. So go buy that ticket if you've been waiting to buy that ticket. If you want a nice and meaningful night out, or you can become a sponsor. Harry Droz, who is the man behind the magic at WNHH, should be dropping the ticket link with this episode and this video. It is on Wednesday, September 17th. Doors open at 6. Fundraiser begins at 6:30. It goes 6:30 to 9 at City Seed. If you haven't seen their beautiful new building, this is a great chance to go. It's at 162 James Street in the Fairhaven neighborhood of New Haven. Highly recommend. And I also just want to thank both of you for coming on Arts Respond, for talking about interruptions and how it has grown and morphed and evolved, and will continue to. I think it's really and then the last thing I just want to let folks know, if they're listening and they say, this sounds like a program that I want to bring into my educational facility, into my house of worship, how can they get in touch with you?
They can reach out to me through my website, or they can email me at info@interruptionswithoutwalls.com. And so it's not just faith-based, it's communities, it's schools, it's mental health clinics, it's community leaders. We have opened this program, this audience, open to everyone. We've had police officers, firefighters come through and to say, I've never had the space to talk about what I've been carrying. And the great things they all, they've come back and gave me their story to tell. And that's what's in the second book, their story of going through this program and them finding their path towards healing.
And if you're a publisher and you're listening to this and you think, oh, I want to publish that book, are you still looking?
Yes, I am. I'm still looking for a
Okay.
publisher.
So we should send this out to publishers and say like, hey,
Yes,
this
I'm
is your
still
next
looking for
book.
a
This is the
publisher.
next book. Yeah.
Yes. It has an international audience. It was funny because I know we're out of time, but the school I went to in Rome Central Pro Union, they called me and they said, we're going to find a way to sponsor you because we're in the book and you're telling our
Yes.
story and you're bringing people to us. So we're going back next year with people to the program. And it's my spiritual journey. It's my retreat space. So we're going back. And so it's an international phenomenon. It's a national movement now.
Absolutely. Reverend Odell Montgomery Cooper, Dr. Jonathan Berryman, thank you so much. And it is Friday while we're recording this, so have a beautiful weekend. Maybe I'll see either or both of you at Black Wall Street on Saturday the
Yes.
16th from noon to 8 p.m., which should be a beautiful celebration on the New Haven Green.
Yes, we'll see you there. Thank you,
Indeed.
Lucy.
Take care.
Thank you much.